Alright, hello again, this is Jeff Scott, your instructor for the online version of 152, 157 website development, XHTML, CSS for the fall 2015 semester at Blackhawk Technical College. We're coming toward the end of Chapter 7 in our text, and I'm on section 7.6 talking about the viewport tag. And what I think I'm going to do here is go into Course Smart and actually bring up the book. Probably not going to go over too many more examples in this chapter. I might when we get to the Flexbox, and I may not finish this in one lesson, even though there's not that many pages. There's a lot of material to discuss here. So, should have done this before I started, but not a problem. Book. So I'm on page 318 of the text. Now, what the rest of this chapter talks about, or at least most of the rest of this chapter, is it starts to really get into the whole idea of mobile devices. And the author mentions that if you don't have a viewport tag set up, a viewport meta tag, which we'll talk about in a little depth in a minute, and you run your site on a mobile device, it'll look like this. If you run it on a mobile device and you've got a viewport meta tag, it'll look more like this. So you can see in the second case, it looks more like it was made for that type of device. They mentioned that the viewport meta tag was created by Apple, all right, and they give you an example of it right here. Now this, typically, what they show here would all be on one line. So let's grab it, put it on one line, and take a look at it, break down the different components that are in here one at a time. So I'm going to have this is going to be long and narrow here. Now this will very much pertain to what you see in the book. All right, this very much pertains to what you see in the book, on not only on the bottom of page 318, but the chart that's on the top of page 319. A little bigger, too big. All right, we'll leave it right there. So they mentioned there, code the viewport tag with the HTML viewport and content attributes. Well, there's the viewport, there's the content. All right. Table 7.3, which is on the next page here, so I can close this, go to the next page, and we'll keep that up while we put our tag up here on the top. See, we can hold them both in here. All right. So the first thing that you see in there is name equal viewport, which means, again, it's going to be a viewport tag. All right. Content equals width, device width. Well, notice what it says here. That's the width of the viewport in pixels. And to put in there, device width indicates the actual width of the device screen. So what you typically do with this stuff, to my knowledge at least, what you typically do when you set this up for a viewport, you may be disabling the pinch mechanism, and you're saying just use as much of the screen as you can possibly use. You'll notice next that the initial scale is set to 1.0, and as mentioned here, set to 1 or 1.0 for 100% initial scale, meaning show everything. We don't have a minimum viewport size, we don't have a maximum viewport size. All right, and we also haven't played in here with user scalable, whereas it says yes, allow scaling, no, disables it. So to my knowledge, the way that this is set up is it says use 100% of our screen to show whatever it is we're trying to show. And when you're doing that, you're using that 100%, don't allow the user to zoom in or out. So just keep it at 100%. All right. Back in Chapter 5, we started talking about responsive web. And as it says, again, kind of all over the place. It's a Sunday morning and I'm getting ready for church. But before we do, I wanted to show you this. This is Bootstrap, all right? And Bootstrap is an example of a framework that you can download. And it allows for, if you do download it, it allows for you to have responsive web design. What does that mean? I'm going down towards the bottom under getbootstrap.com. I'm going down towards the bottom, and I'm going to find Explore the Expo. And these are some sites, I believe at least. Some of these are sites that have been created, and they've been created using Bootstrap. I think I've shown that one before, so let's grab a different one. All right. So I'm grabbing this one right here. All right. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, you'll notice right now it's taking up pretty much 100% of the screen. And also notice when I start to resize it, what happens. All right. You see how it looks a lot different? I don't have any more. My graphic is gone, basically. I've got the logo. And if I click here, that shows me all of the different possibilities that I have. The different options, my menu options. All right. And if I go here, what is happening is it's treating my app, for lack of better words, as though it's one big, long, narrow page. So everything is still in there, except maybe some of the graphics. So why did I show you that? Because what that is, literally, is that right there, that is an example of a responsive web design. All right, so they showed examples, and this was back, I think, what, on page 226. So I'm going to jump back to 226 and 227 for a second. And the author said, here's a mobile site. So there's the White House site that's shown on a mobile device. And you can see everything, but it looks like it's kind of shrunken down. And then we have this one. This is how you would display this, what is it, Css Sedona, and that's how you display it on a desktop. You'll notice there's plenty of room, and you even have a border on the sides. Then when we show it on a netbook, all right, where you've got a smaller display, you've got no border, but basically it looks pretty much the same. If we look at this portrait, same kind of thing. So there it is, more landscape, and there it is, more portrait. Well, if we bring it up to here, now notice we've got the same information, but our pictures are gone. Our actual Css Sedona has shrunken down, and our options that are here are now shown here. Quite often when you shrink it down enough, you don't see anything. You saw this just a second ago in this expo that I showed you. All right. When we shrunk that down, instead of seeing products, cloud, customers, community, learn, company, etc., once you shrunk it down, you see this. And when you click here, they're still all there. All right? They're still there. And then you can choose any one you want. So the whole idea with responsive web design, let's put it into a sentence or two. Look at it in a nutshell, as they say. And that is the fact that with responsive website design, which can be done using media queries, the idea is you want to make the user's experience as maximum as possible for whatever device they're using. This gets into the whole idea of what's called UX, or user experience design, which I don't believe they talk about much in this class, but I'm going to have to find a way to start interweaving this into the program. All right, so what's a media query on the bottom of the page? According to the W3C, a media query is made up of a media type like screen and a logical expression that determines the capability of the device the browser is running on. So for instance, we're saying here that this Lighthouse Mobile CSS should only pertain if we're running a screen and if we've got a width. We don't have a minimum width, but you couldn't have 0 pixels. Typically a minimum width would maybe be around 300 pixels, but a maximum width of 480. So in other words, this right here, this particular CSS file should only apply if we're looking at something on a screen resolution and it's between technically 0 and 480 pixels. So as it says, the code sample above directs browsers to an external style sheet configured for optimal display for most popular smartphones. The media type value only is a keyword that hides the media element from outdated browsers. All right, that's usually not going to be a case unless, you know, I can't imagine that you would have an old browser loaded on a mobile phone. So the media types they discuss here, they show you this chart that's on the middle of page 320. And as the author says here, this shows the same web page as figure 7.8. So that was back on page... So let's go back and look at that. That was back on page 302. So that's what it looked like, basically, and that's how it would look on a screen on probably a desktop, at least a laptop, but probably on a desktop. Now when we move to page 320 and we've added a media query in here, you can see how different it looks. And again, it's because the link element contains a media query, the one that's right here that we just looked at. The media types are shown here again on the middle of the page. They're all, which says cover all devices, screen display of a page only, causes older browsers to ignore it, and print for print display. You can't have both a minimum and a maximum. There's the example here. So this would run, usually I think this is going to be probably on a laptop, minimum width of 768 pixels and a maximum width of 1024. So that's like saying greater than or equal to 768 and less than or equal to 1024. All right, so that's one way you can do it. Another way is they start to mention on the bottom of page 320, and it goes on the next page, is the second way to do this is to code them directly in your CSS using this media rule. So you can see the example that they show here on the bottom of the page. It says there, by coding @media followed by the media type and logical expression, you then enclose the desired CSS selectors and declarations within braces. So this example configures a different background image, especially for devices with small screens. So as we turn the page and we look right here, these are the commonly used media query features. Max device height, max device width, minimum device height, minimum device width. All right. Max height, max width, min width, and then our orientation, which would be portrait or landscape. So the author says, what value should I use in my media queries? All right. And the answer is, it depends, which is a crummy answer, but it's an honest one. And what it means there is you should use the one you're most comfortable with and try a variety and see what you think looks best. So web developers often check the max width feature to determine the type of device being used, be it a smartphone, tablet, or desktop. When choosing the values, be aware that the way the navigation and content display as the viewport narrows and widens. Choose your media queries with the web page display in mind. So the bottom line is this. Go ahead and configure, then test, test, test. Change is necessary, but continue to test, test, test. All right? Now, Hands-on Practice 7.7 starts on page 322, and it goes on to 323 and 324. And you'll notice here they're showing a 2-column site. This, again, would probably be shown on at least a tablet, and maybe even something bigger than that. All right, so they come in here, and there's not really a whole lot special in there, but then they go and they add some media queries, screen only, max width of 1024, okay? And then they come in on the next page and they're resetting the media query. They want the max width, it looks like on the bottom of page 323, to be 768. So you'll see as you start to move this around, you went from a 2-column format here to a 1-column format here. And again, what you'll probably see as you shrink it down even more, and they don't show it on this example, but what you might very well see is not only would you go down to a 1-column format, all right, but you would probably, these things that you see here would be gone with your menu options. And there would just be a little icon up here, meaning if you clicked it, it would open up and allow you to choose any of them. You might also choose that when you get to a certain width, maybe the picture, I mean, this is a lighthouse here and it probably would work okay, but at least at times you might get so narrow that a picture that you're looking at doesn't do you any good, so you get rid of it. All right, and that gets us to the bottom of page 324, talking about flexible images, and which often is referred to, I believe in at least, as, well, let's talk about flexible images here. All right, and then we'll stop it on 328 when they talk about Flexbox. So they mention here in his book, Responsive Web Design, Ethan Marcotte describes a flexible image as being a fluid image that will not break the page layout as you expand or contract. The technique to make something flexible, as it says, is to change the HTML and the CSS to style the flexible image. Edit the image elements. This is the key thing. Set the max width to 100% in the CSS. If it's less than the width of the container, the image will display with its actual dimensions. By putting it at 100%, it will do the best it can to try to be proportional. Finally, to keep the dimensions in proportion and maintain the aspect ratio, Bruce Lawson suggests you set the height to auto. All right. On the bottom of page 324 and going on to 325, background images can also be configured for a more fluid display at various viewport sizes. So there's one more hands-on practice here, 7-8, that's on pages 325 and 326. And as it says in there, you'll work with a web page that demonstrates the responsive web design. Here they're depicting a 3-column layout, and here it's 2-column, but you'll see that at least proportionally, all right, the page and the image on the page still looks okay. All right, last thing I want to mention here real quick, there's just a page or two I want to go over, and that is on testing mobile display right here. And that's on page 326. So the author says here, the best way to test mobile display is to publish it to the web and access it from a mobile device. Well, that should make sense. There are all sorts of emulators. So, and they mention here on the bottom of the page, not everyone has a smartphone or has a smartphone currently available or maybe a connection or whatever. So there's an Opera emulator, and the URL is shown on the bottom of 326, and they show it pictorially here on 327. There's Mobilizer, there's an iPhone emulator, and there are other ones also. So they mention here, if you don't have a smartphone and you're unable to publish, you can kind of do what I did. And that is, when I showed you this here, when we went in and we were looking at these things, let me just grab a different one here. And when I showed you here, no, that's not what I wanted to show you. This was. And we'll just grab this one. That you can come in here and you can change the size of your actual, in my case it's a laptop, all right? And you can get an idea. So watch as I stretch this, how this changes. All right, still looks pretty much the same. Still looks pretty much the same. All right, so in this case I picked the bad one because it's not changing very much. All right, let's go back and see if we can find one of the, this is the one we used previously. So again, if I take this one, and there it is full screen, and notice we still have all of our options up here, but as we keep shrinking it down, now they've disappeared. Now more stuff has disappeared. So that's what the author is talking about. They're testing it with a desktop browser. All right, and that's on 327. Finally, on page 328, on the top half of the page, the author talks about a few things here that are very important as we finish up this part of the lecture. Again, when we get down to the bottom of the page, CSS Flexible Box Layout, I'm going to do a separate lecture on that. So this is for serious developers only. If you're a software developer, you may want to explore the SDKs, the software development kits for Android and for iOS, because they have built-in emulators that you can use. If you are in this program, you will take in your last semester a beginning iOS and a beginning Android class. Media Queries and Internet Explorer, you again end up putting a shiv in here, all right, which is the JavaScript workaround, so you don't have to worry about this working. Finally, the last thing I want to mention here is this mobile first idea. This is an idea that's being put across by a lot of people right now. And what they say is, well, if you're going to design a brand new website, why don't you design for a mobile site first, which is typically harder to do, and then develop alternative sites for tablet and or desktop, etc. All right, if you want to find out more about it, you can see that they give you 3 different URLs that you can take a look at. All right, and that brings us to this CSS Flexible Box Layout, which is typically called Flexbox, and I'm going to handle that in the next lecture.